Redditors who have gone were declared missing. What is your story? Story 1. I left the abusive household I grew up in, leaving a note clearly stating my intentions to never return. An hour or two later, I received a call from the police stating that I'd been declared missing. I explained to them my circumstances, and they wished me well. Since I was of age, I was free. I'll be 3 years soon. Edit fixed a typo. Edit 2. Holy guacamole. There's so many of you. I woke up this morning to a whole lot of love, and am so thankful for each and every one of you beautiful people. I was going to try and answer everyone individually, but I'm starting to realize that it's a bit of a momentous task, so I want to thank yous all collectively for the awards, and for sharing your own stories. I'm proud of those of you who took the necessary steps to secure your freedom and happiness. I know that it can get lonely in this big old world of ours, so if anybody needs a friend to chit-chat with, my inbox is open, and seriously, thank yous all again. My heart is fuzzy and warm today. Story 2. I was 8 and on vacation. Decided to go for a walk without telling anyone. Played all afternoon on the beach. Came at night. Oh boy, was everyone mad. Story 3. I had a mental breakdown in 2015 after losing a job, after having a hard year. So I packed a bag, got on my motorbike road to a party spot Gold Coast. I got out enough cash to hold me over for a week, turn off my mobile before I left town. I spent a whole week just hitting the beach, partying, hitting bars, clubs. I stayed at a backpacker hostel, hung out with random backpackers. Overall, it was an amazing, refreshing week. I left to ride back home. Just before the Great Dividing Range, I got pulled over by the cops. Turns out, my 2 co-workers I saw after I got fired were worried, so they came by my house just to check up on me. My housemates then didn't see me for a few days after being told that I'd been fired, so they searched town, reported me to the cops as missing. I had a known history of depression, suicidal tendencies. The cops searched through my records, no mobile phone activity, no social media activity, no contact with family members. So it turns out while I was off trying to just escape my shitty life for a week, everyone thought I'd killed myself or something. My license plate number was flagged, so when I went past the highway patrol, it must have come up on their computer to pull me over. The cop was actually quite nice. He mainly just wanted to know I was okay. He called and had me removed as a missing person in Australia. Once you're listed as a missing person, you have to be cited verified by a police officer to be removed. I got home 8 hours later to a lot of worried people. I honestly thought no one gave about me. If I knew it was going to cause so much trouble, I would have at least left a note. Story 4. The story of how I went missing is also one of my first memories. When I was 5, I went on holiday with my family to Scotland. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but land dominated by trees. There wasn't much to do, so my sister and I played hide and seek. I thought it would be a great idea to hide right next to the front door of the cottage we were staying in. Inside of a giant bush, I watched my sister look for me for about 5 minutes, until she clearly gave up and went inside. However, I never give up on anything, and decided to stay until I was found. After a short period, 15 minutes or so, more people started playing the game. I now watch my parents sprint around in front of me, while I silently giggled in the bush, thinking I'm so good at this game. More and more people started to play. Other holiday goers in cottages nearby, park rangers and police. I stayed in that bush for hours and hours until it got dark. Having the time of my life, my sister was only 7, so she didn't help look for me and just sat by the doorstep. As it got darker outside, my yellow jacket got brighter, and after a whole day of searching for me in the nearby woods, my sister realized I was stood right next to her. Best game of hide and seek ever. Story 5. I forget how old I was, but I was probably around 10. My friend and I started raking leaves for cash around our suburban neighborhood. We kept going house to house, asking anyone who had a tree in their yard if they wanted them raked for 5. We eventually went to so many houses we got ourselves lost within the crisscross streets of the neighborhood, since we really never left our block of houses beforehand. Then the sun set, and we found ourselves lost trying to recognize street names or anything familiar in the dark with only street lights lighting the way. Eventually, as we're wandering lost, we hear cop sirens and lights blare and pull over and ask for our names. We got picked up and taken back to our houses. It felt like a long drive to us 10-year-olds, but in reality, it was like 4 blocks. Oh, well, boy, did we get the biggest scolding ever, and our parents took our hard-earned money. Story 6. I ran away from home due to my alcoholic stepmom. My dad would always file a missing person report, and cops would eventually find me and bring me home. At 15, I was homeless for 6 months, and selling acid for food and a place to stay was still better than dealing with my stepmom. She drank herself to death, and I found peace. Story 7. Mine was weird because I was also a teen runaway, but was actually with my parents. In a nutshell, 1. Ran away from home when I was 14. 2. Lived on the streets with friends or in shelter for 2 years. 3. My parents moved away from that city, so I was left behind. Long story there. but they tried their best for me, but had to let go for last known address was with a boyfriend who was arrested along with his best friend who was dating my best friend. Landlady obviously evicted them both, which led to me having nowhere to go, ran out of options in the middle of winter. It was a middle-of-the-night blurry event that resulted in me having nowhere to go. My best friend was able to go to her family somehow or somewhere. We got separated that night and vowed to find each other and regroup and figure out after some sleep. 5. At this point, after 2 years, just before my 16th birthday, I called my parents, who drove several hours and picked me up at a McDonald's at 5 a.m. and brought me back to their new city. I was determined to start over and get on a good path with the lone support of my parents and leave the old life completely behind. The only person I told was my best friend at the time, and I remember we were both crying. She wasn't sure about her family and asked me that once I got settled, maybe she could come to my family as well. For a new start. 6. She went missing right after that, which I didn't know right away. I had one phone call from her where she told me things weren't good, and she was trying to get money for a Greyhound ticket to come to my new city. My boyfriend and her boyfriend were both in jail at the time. Since the 4 of us were known to be together, when she went missing, the police's first priority was to find me, but no one knew where I was, so the police themselves marked me also as missing along with her. My parents had a different last name than me, and I was a minor, so there wasn't a whole lot of information on me. Basically, they knew I was an underage street kid who couldn't be accounted for, whose best friend was also missing. 7. Maybe 2 months later, I was settled into my new life. My parents registered me in school, bought me new belongings. I had lost everything when the landlady kicked my boyfriend out. I got a part-time job, and they also got me a therapist through some sort of free social services that got my name into the system. The police has also pieced that her last call was to a number in the same city where I was now registered in social services. While at school one day, the police showed up and brought me into the guidance counselor's office and asked me a hell of a lot of questions that I don't remember now, but I do remember them telling me I was a missing person and then grilling me about knowing where the other girl was, who I didn't even know what missing, and that I had to know something. But it was just a really bizarre coincidence that I had burned out on street life the same time she went missing. The most tragic part of this story is that she had died. Her body was found later that spring after the snow melted, which I saw on the news. They said she froze to death. No foul play. I had nightmares for so long about this that she was knocking on my bedroom window, pleading to come in from the cold. That was all late 80s. News back then wasn't so dramatic as it is now, and even her death was a small clip in a newspaper. No headlines or anything like that. There was no Amber Alert back then. ESP not for street people with criminal boyfriends. The only reason the police were after us was because her mother reported her as missing. A lot of it is a blur to me now. But in 2007, when FB started getting mainstream, I got several messages from people I knew back then saying they thought I was dead. And was it really me? It was really bizarre. Our old friend from that city had said that we both went missing. My friend's body was found, and they never knew what became of me. Story 8, as a paramedic, we once attended a call for a male with sore feet, attended a lay-by the side of a road to a perfectly polite chap who did have some very nasty blisters, had been to a family funeral, got a bit upset, and had gone for a walk to clear his head, then just kept walking for 4 days. Turns out he was from the same area as where I grew up, about 250 miles away, and we reminisced about the countryside and some of the good pubs, etc. He admitted that maybe he was a bit depressed and probably needed some help. Unfortunately, all we could offer was a trip to hospital, but we did what we could. Later that shift, I'm perusing Facebook and see an old school friend has shared a missing person appeal. It's our walking patient. I rang the police and told them where our chap was, and they were very pleased, as they expected a dog walker to find him hanging somewhere. Story 9, not me, but my hubby, and this was years ago. Hubby was about 8 or 9 years old when he and a group of boys were approached by some middle-aged Italians to sell candy. The kids were loaded into a van and taken to neighboring towns to hawk this candy. At some point, the kids started asking when they were going home, as the van was going further than they were expecting. A few kids started crying, then out comes a gun, and they're told you're not going home. More tears, and then the van stopped, I believe, for a bathroom stop, but it was near an open field. A few of the kids decided to make a mad dash through this field, being chased by the men, and made it to a grocery store. The authorities were alerted, and their parents came to collect the children. They were about an hour away from home when found. Hubby is 55 now and hyper-vigilant about the grandkids and stranger danger. Story 10, I was on vacation for 3 weeks. In the second week, my boss called me and asked if everything is okay, because the police called them and told them that I was declared missing. My neighbor called the police because he didn't hear me for over a week and was worried about me. It was kind of a good feeling at it, while my most upvoted post is about me, who was just drunk for 3 weeks and got declared missing XD. Thank you guys. Story 11. I took my 3 children and did a flit to get away from their father who had attempted to kill me in front of them. I drove around 150 miles away. We were given a room in a woman's refuge in a coastal town. While the processing papers went through, the children asked to go to the beach. Even though it was November and cold, they were happily making sandcastles when I noticed a photographer. He kept directing the camera towards us, but casually tracked away. When I looked up, I was worried that the photos could give away our location. So I went to speak to him, but I couldn't catch up, so left it. I found out later that I had been reported as missing and a danger to the children by their father. We did not stay in the refuge long, as I never felt completely safe there after that. Story 12. I went to rehab. I don't know why I didn't think to tell anyone, but I was a drug addict, so my brain was mush. My now ex-boyfriend was the only person who knew. About a weekend, I got called into the main office at the rehab and was told that my mother got a hold of them, freaking out and telling them that I had been missing for a month. She was exaggerating, but they legally weren't allowed to tell her that I was there, so I had to call her to explain the situation. When I got out, I had messages from tons of people asking if I was alive, and found out even my old job was contacted. I found out that my best friend and my brother messaged my ex, and he ignored them and never told me that they contacted him. If he had, I would have told him to tell them where I was, and the whole thing could have been avoided. I felt really bad about the whole situation because it stressed a lot of people out. Story 13. When I was in elementary school, like 8 years old, my brother and me were good friends with 2 guys who were brothers as well. Same age span. One weekend, we were all playing NES at their place first, and later my friend and me were outside doing stupid things kids would do. Sometime my brother leaves with his friend and comes over to us and tells me that our parents called. They will stay a little longer at my aunt's and uncle's place this night. Nothing too special, but they told him we shouldn't mind our time and can stay outside as long as we want, as long as we sleep at home that night. Jackpot. I trusted my brother blindly on this, and we proceeded to do stupid stuff like kicking over trash bins. The evening fades, and my friend is about to leave to get some dinner and sleep. His parents are also away. I didn't think a second about going home because I was allowed to stay outside for so long, and I will definitively enjoy it to its fullest. It is already really dark, and I trample down some patches as I wander through my hood. It is beyond 11:00 p.m., and this is really late for an 8-year-old when I see a car approaching. I was always good with remembering license plates, and immediately notices that these are my parents. Since I was raised well-behaved, I did what was right. I waved at them as they were passing. They didn't see me first because they immediately hit the brakes once they did, jumped out of the car, screaming, and threw me in the back. I had no idea what was happening, but was sad that it looks like the night of my life was over. At home, I noticed that my mom called the local police telling them that I was safe back home, and my dad struggled between punishing me and just being glad I'm home alive. This is when I was able to tell them what happened and why I wasn't home when they came back. You know, bro told me that you called and allowed us to be outside as long as we wanted to. So I'm not understanding why you were so upset about this. You guessed right, he had no idea what I was talking about. Not exactly sure, but I think it took my brother something around 15 years to admit this. Story 14. This was about 10 years ago. I had just moved to California with my ex-husband, and the downstairs neighbor in our first apartment was a crazy drug addict that would always bother and harass us. One day, the next-door neighbors decided to rearrange their apartment, and my downstairs neighbor came up threatening to kill me, thinking I was making that noise on purpose. She was a nightmare to deal with. I was sneaking out of my own apartment just so she wouldn't hear me and come running upstairs to hang out anyways. I reported this anonymously to the apartments and filed a police report. Apparently, this lady had many complaints about her to begin with. After the report, my ex picked me up, and we went out for lunch. Well, those dumbass at the apartment complex went and talked to her and told her everything I'd said. Came back to find her knocking on our door screaming. We kept driving and went to Walmart, got some camping gear, and drove off to go camp at Yosemite for the weekend to escape. I believe we managed to sneak into our app to sleep for a few hours and told another neighbor a quick, just going camping this weekend. And I sent text to my mother, brother, and sister. Well, only the text of my sister went through. So the last thing my mom heard from me was about the ordeal with the downstairs neighbor threatening to kill me, and then nothing. Gone for 4 days, come back to cell service, and my phone is flooded with frantic voicemails from my mother and brother. They filed a police report thinking my downstairs neighbor had murdered us and was convinced she was wearing our skin as a mask. She didn't believe the other neighbor when they said, "Oh yeah, they went camping," she thought. That's a cover-up. My daughter has never even been camping, which was true. That was the first time. After a 3-day ordeal, they finally call my sister to report the bad news that I was murdered. She laughs and tells them I'm camping, and my mother pauses and says, "What? How do you know this?" She texted me and told me. Why didn't anyone bother calling me when this all started? I get back into cell service, hear these messages, and immediately call the parents and call off the missing persons report. After a few years, I try to bring it up as a joke. Hey, remember when you thought I'd done got murdered? What a crazy weekend that was. Still no laughs. Maybe a few more years need to pass. Story 15, I was a teen and ran away from home and was missing for a few weeks. Left my small town due to small town going on and was basically road tripping with a friend. Story 16, not me, but a friend's ex. I know how it sounds. This girl was involved in a pretty bad abusive relationship. She tried to leave and suddenly disappeared. Months had passed, and people began to assume the worst. Eventually, she managed to escape her kidnapper and return home. The details are scarce, unfortunately, but it's best for her sake. My friend received a friend request from her on Facebook shortly after her return. She's now missing an eye, in a neck brace, and her head is bald and scarred from brain surgery. Poor girl was beaten so badly. Story 17, my cousin was kidnapped when he was very young, maybe 45. My aunt was living in Belgium at the time. He was kidnapped and thrown in a car, witnessed by many people. Police were called. My poor aunt was frantic. He was left at the side of a road about 8 hours later. But to this day, they never found out who took him, where they took him to, and what happened to him while he was gone. It's a taboo subject that I could never bring up to my aunt. Story 18, not very eventful, but I was probably in first or second grade when we had taken a family trip to Las Vegas. We had spent a lot of the hot day in Circus exploring the arcade, rides, and tomfoolery they had going on, but at night we went out to explore, no clue where. There was some kind of crazy light show, this white awning above a walking path filled with people, music, and all of these neat lights and lasers flashing around, being cast onto the covering. I think I stared at the lights too long and tried to keep following my parents without really looking where I was going. By the time I looked for them, they were nowhere in sight. Suddenly, the music was scary too loud, and I couldn't listen for my parents when I called out for them. The crowd instantly seemed thicker, and the lights almost distorted what I saw. It all seemed so disorienting. I started crying because I lost my parents, and they weren't answering when I called out for them. A man came up to me in a uniform, maybe security or police, and was very kind to the tiny, terrified human, and helped me look for them. I'm sure this whole endeavor wasn't very long, but it felt like an eternity. We eventually found them. He tapped my mom on the shoulder and said something like, "I think you may have lost this." She responded with an "oh," and carried on. And that is my story. Story 19, about 6 years ago, I hit a really nasty bottom in my addiction to alcohol. I decided to end it and broke contact with everyone as I drank myself to death. When my family found the room I was staying in, it was covered in blood. I was throwing up blood, and the police suspected that I'd killed myself and gone somewhere to die. In the meantime, in some state, I had crawled into the road covered in blood and was taken to the ICU for a week until they put the pieces together and notified my family. Fun times. Note 5 years sober and a lot better now. Story 21, Christmas. My mom wanted to pay a visit to her infamously crazy sister. Nobody else wanted to go. She was a bad person. So was Mom. Really? And Mom seemed a bit upset. I took one for the team and hopped in the car with her. Mom told everyone we would take about an hour and would be back in time for lunch, in and out. In actuality, we were there for 4 hours. It wasn't a pleasant visit. I stood in the lounge in silence, scared to sit down because I couldn't spot a chair that wasn't covered in junk semi-hoarder situation, listening to my mom and her sister gossiping about trivial things and collecting intel on people they knew. You might think intel was a strange choice of words. I said earlier that my auntie is a nutter. I guess it's time to say that my mom is also not right. She is one of those people who obsesses over others like a stalker and will collect information about others, even total strangers. Then she uses that information to manipulate others. Turns out my auntie is the same. They spent none of that 4-hour visit talking about normal things. They weren't interested in how the other was doing. Nobody cared about the kids or work or anything like that. Nobody spoke to me for hours. They just gossiped about strangers and collected intel for their weird habit. I cannot stress enough how uneasy I was in the presence of these women. It was such a surreal moment, witnessing my mom go full nutter in front of me like that. She was always so careful to hide that kind of behavior. When we finally got home, I was exhausted, and everyone was frantic. We'd been gone for hours longer than we should have been. My phone was at home. I figured I didn't need it. Mom turned hers OFF. Summer and Christmas are peak road accident times. My family heard police sirens in the distance and were scared we had gotten in a car crash. Dad and my sister even drove around looking for us. Mom was not apologetic. Story 21, my favorite story, is from when my cousin was 4 and we were on the beach with our whole family. At one moment, he just disappeared. We searched for him for hours and called the police. Turns out he went to a random hotel that was 2 minutes away from the beach, too. Met a bunch of kids in the hotel and played with them, and everyone just thought he was a guest there. He even had dinner because the buffet had just been served. We almost sent a diving team to see if he drowned. My auntie was missing for 15 years. She stopped answering calls, moved house, and changed her number. I grew from age 3 to 18. I had 2 younger siblings she didn't know existed. One afternoon, I answered the phone at my parents' house. My mom had never changed her phone number. I've already moved out, but am visiting my dog. My family are away for the day. It's this aunt. I recognizes her voice from her reading me bedtime stories. She sounds so similar to my mom. Am naturally freaking out about keeping her on the line, getting contact information, where she lives now, etc. Long story short, it's been 9 years. She is medicated for her schizophrenia and happy to be back in the family. Story 22, my cousin went missing, called the cops, gave a statement, and suddenly he appears. Everyone was very happy but still confused. Turns out he fell asleep under the sofa. Story 23, ran away from a residential treatment center that wasn't giving me the care I needed and was threatening to send me to another RDC famous for their abusive tactics. I ended up being driven to a hospital by the police after they talked with the staff at the RDC I ran from. Even they didn't think I should go to the infamously abusive one. Later on, the abusive one closed down. Story 24, when I was a teenager, I got my stupid heart broken really bad. As a young, dumb teen, I skipped school and drank at this sketchy little bar, not too far from school, got faced, lost track of time, phone died. When my parents noticed that I didn't come home, they came to my school to ask if I was still there. When they were told that I didn't come to class that day, they thought I ran away from home. They were driving around looking for me and saw me drunk as puking my guts out on a sidewalk, man. That was one in whooping. Story 25, I yeeted myself off a cliff. Why, I was a kid, miraculously survived with only some bad scrapes and bruises, but my parents were shouting. And, well, you can't discipline what you can't find. Story 26, I wasn't necessarily missing, so to speak, but many of my friends thought I was dead. My mother is bipolar and probably has a personality disorder. She was extremely abusive to me while I was growing up. In the late 1990s, I leave home at 16, with her blessing, to go work as a nanny for several families in other parts of the U.S. A year later, I became ill. I ended up having to go back to my parents' home for about 2 months while I was still 17, but only 2 to 3 weeks away from turning 18, my mother began mistreating me again. So I left without telling anyone. Mom called the police. The highway patrol called me, and I explained the situation, and they told me I was fine and wished me luck. Mom calls me, screaming. She's furious. She can't force me to come back. She told me if I didn't come back, I'd be dead to her. I decided not to go back. We didn't speak for years. Fast forward to 2007. I joined Facebook. I see people I know from my childhood and youth, so I start adding them because I want to see how they're doing, etc. People are freaked out, asking me who TF I am, etc. And am wondering WTF is going on. Turns out, when I refused to go home as my mother demanded, she had written an obituary for me. And since she was a frequent columnist, a local paper published it. All of my friends and everyone in that area thought I was dead for nearly 10 years. When I confronted my mom about it, she said, I wasn't lying, you were dead to me. Story 27, oh yay one, I can reply to. When my friend and I were about 12, we rented one of those boats you paddle with your legs like a bike. We went on a river known as a serpentine in our town because it weaves so much between the reeds. My mom was sitting on the bank and started reading a magazine and let us do our thing. We go off on our adventure, and eventually we reach the other end of the river. I remember watching a survival show, and you can count with your hands or something to see how many hours you have left in the day or something by putting your hands under the sun. It was weird kid logic, and we assumed we'd been gone half an hour. We turn around and head back. There's our moms and dads standing with the owners of the paddle boats and a cop. Our moms were absolutely panicking, and we come strolling down like, hey, what's the problem? Our parents see us and come rushing over asking if we're okay. Turns out we've been gone for 4 hours, and they went looking for us upstream instead of the downstream way we went. They were scared we might have tipped over and drowned. My friend and I were having so much fun on the boat, we didn't even realize how long we'd been gone. Classic miscommunication and kids being dumb. She and I were fine, but were my legs stiff the next day. Story 28, not me, but my very good friend in grad school was out sailing off of Galveston, Texas with another friend. They were both drinking and lost control of their catamaran with a strong offshore breeze. The friend's wife first noticed and called me. Then others, no one had seen them, worried. She called the police, who called the Coast Guard. The next day, they were discovered over 100 miles in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. It was later discovered both strong currents and wind pushed them out past what was presumed possible after missing for X hours. Both were severely dehydrated, delirious, and babbling about sharks. Both were rushed to a local hospital. Total bill $120K. Made the Houston Chronicle, and they never lived it down. To this day, they both are happy to be alive. Moral of the story, boating and drinking don't mix. Never turn your back on the ocean. Story 29. When I was about 3 or 4, I fell asleep in my grandma's bed. But because of the groove from her sleeping there over the years, she couldn't tell. Grandma freaked out and filed missing persons report. The police came, and it was assumed I'd been taken from the house. Boy, were they relieved when I stumbled out after my nap. Story 30. I went on a hike and just disappeared from everyone I knew. One day, I told my friends I was going on a hike, and I just never showed up to work or my house again. After a couple of days, I was declared missing, and after a couple of months, most people assumed I was dead. I hitchhiked across the U.S., Mexico, and Canada for 2 years. Story 31. When I was 5, my mom left my cousin 6 and I in the car to run in a gas station. This was back in the 80s, I should add. My mom's car had those back seats that folded down from inside the car. So I had a great idea to scare my mom. So my cousin and I climbed in the back and closed the seats. It was about 10 minutes later and no mom. So we popped out with smiles and saw a cop car and mom and I crying. I was never allowed to stay in the car alone again after that. Story 32. I was 7 in Ocean City, Maryland. My dad took the kids for a huge cousin vacation without my mom for the first and last time. Ever being a very responsible 7-year-old, I was tasked with washing the sand toys in the ocean water before we packed up. But I also have zero sense of direction, and the beach was packed. I became turned around near the water and just started walking and kept walking. I remember being told not to talk to strangers, so I walked for 37 blocks until I found a lifeguard that looked familiar. Apparently, I was missing, and she knew exactly who I was when I told her I was lost. Story 33. Just remember a story my friend told me. She and her family were at the mall. Somehow her youngest boy got separated from them. They contacted security and were just frantic looking for him. They were told to go home after a while, and the police would contact them. They went home, very upset of course, and to their surprise their son was there, apparently after not finding them. He decided they forgot him, so he decided to walk home. A nice couple saw this little boy walking by himself next to a highway and realized something was wrong. They drove him home, and not sure if they waited with him. This was before cell phones as well. Story 34. I guess not technically a missing person. When I was about 9 or 10, I was out skiing with one of my dad's friends and his son. We decided to meet at a particular lift line as it was the end of the day and the lifts were shutting. We must have miscommunicated and ended up down the bottom of a black diamond run. Once I got down to the bottom, the lift had shut and the operators had left. I'd skied the mountain since I was 4, so I knew how to get back, although it would have taken hours to walk back. Lucky, after about 30 of walking up the steepest hill with my skies, I heard a bunch of police sleds out. Managed to wave them down in the pitch black and drop me back to our accommodation. My parents' mate came back white as a ghost thinking I was lost somewhere. Sorry, Steve. Story 35. When I was 8, I decided to walk to my sister's apartment. 2 miles away. I checked the distance as an adult 30 years later. My mom couldn't find me in my usual haunts, so she called the police. The last she saw me, I was topless, so the police were looking for a little boy in no shirt. When I had actually stopped by the house and put one on, she was relieved when my sister called and said, "Guess who just showed up?" Story 36. Another story. Someone in my neighborhood was abducted from her bus stop last year. They found her phone in a drain grate. All her friends were freaking out, parents panicking, and other parents terrified that their kids may be next. Turns out, she had a secret 20-year-old boyfriend who she snuck away with, and they just had all day. Dude was arrested, and nobody's really heard from the girl since. Story 37. I got too drunk in a foreign country and got mugged. I was lost, terrified, and didn't speak the language well enough. So I broke into a basement cellar to hide and passed out. But then I got arrested because apparently the cellar was an apartment. I kept trying to give them my parents' phone number, but they couldn't understand me, and it was Thanksgiving, so the American embassy was closed. 2 days later, they let me go. My parents were less than thrilled, but because things were so poorly handled, they let me off as long as I paid for repairs. So the moral of the story is don't go to Spain.